When I was young, I had a lot of older friends. I was the only 3-year-old walking around with 7-year-old people in my neighborhood. It was a very small rural town, so it was my best friend was a 75-year-old man. It just was it was. So as I get older, I have gone to go back to the well of that thought process of knowing that things never last forever. Things used to be there, aren't there, and changes happen because they must. It happens. But you still have a twinging for what exactly happened and how it got there. We're talking about something that is literally legacy for me because it's something that was born during my college days and born from beyond that when I really got into it. And this is late night television, specifically The Late Show, now with Stephen Colbert. But there's a bigger issue in this that most of us in my Gen X age are sort of dealing with the changes that are happening that are freaking us out, that millennials, Gen Zs, Gen Alphas are kind of like, what do you mean? Because it didn't exist. And boomers have been complaining about for forever. Let's talk about The Late Show, which last night Stephen Colbert announced on the episode that happened last night that the final episodes of the show will air in May of 2026. And that will end the 33-year-old run of the show. David Letterman, of course, ran it for 22 years, and that show was created as he left NBC and the late night show to the Late Show to take over the time slot to compete directly with the Tonight Show on CBS because he knew he wasn't going to get that gig overall. 11 years since that, it's been Stephen Colbert running the show, taking his turn from his time on Comedy Central, being on The Daily Show, and of course the Colbert Report. The decision was confirmed pretty much yesterday. It was done, and it was said during the live taping of the theater, the Ed Sullivan Theater there for the show. The first time it was announced to the world was by Stephen Colbert, basically saying what he said. CBS and its parent company Paramount described the move as purely financial. It has nothing to do with political politics, but we'll get into that in a moment. But says that even though Stephen Colbert was the highest watched guy in that time slot, essentially he was winning out, although the numbers are kind of really tight between Jimmy Kimmel and, of course, Jimmy Fallon. The budget was just not there. We know CBS recently canceled their second late show that they changed to a more talk show comedy show because it wasn't working. Now the late night format on CBS essentially going away. CBS had to fight kind of hard to make a late night format in itself because NBC and ABC had their things. ABC, of course, had Nightline forever, or at least when the Orang Hot Contra started. And NBC always had to the Tonight Show, and most of the time had a late show with David Letterman. This was what was created there. Yeah, the problem is literally the show is basically the top in the ratings, but the money isn't there. Early this week, Colbert actually criticized Paramount's $16 million settlement with Donald Trump over 60 Minutes defamation suit, which calling it a big fat bribe, which the timing of this actually happening sort of makes it a little suspect of the call. Now, if it's really going to be something that's swept under the rug, you would think they would wait a little bit to do this. But essentially, the call was made early after the call it was there. So it looks a lot like CBS is capitulating to the Trump administration. Paramount is trying its best to make this big deal they want to happen. So suspicions are being raised about political influence and not just the money at this time. CBS can put anything they want to here that's cheaper. Maybe another news program. Maybe they'll give it back to the networks and let them do what they want with it. It is prime real estate, if you will, people watching after the nighttime news. But it's got to be prime real estate for something that's actually going to sell. And Colbert can go do something else. We know what happened with Conan O'Brien, and he went to do his own personal things and has deals all over the place, and he's basically everywhere still. But the biggest thing about this is we talked a few days ago about Fox Sports killing some of its programming, going to traditional stuff, whatever that's going to be. And while you may not like the hosts that lost their jobs, every time a host loses a job, that's a gig that's lost. And every time a gig is lost, that's a gig that won't come back for someone else. This is a time slot, a gig that won't come back for someone else. And it's really kind of sad because, as we said, 30 years of the Late Show, 30 years of this on CBS, and 30 years of this being a staple out there that no longer exists. Now, what will replace it? Who knows? Will it be better? Will it be more efficient? Will it actually work out? Will they have an extra late news show that they can use a package of things going back and forth so they can complain for Trump for 2 more years until something happens? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't work for Paramount. I don't have the juice to create a great show to put in that time slot. If anybody up there wants to hear my news, call me and I will give you some ideas. I will take something, and I'm sure I'll be much less, much more affordable, much less expensive as a Stephen Colbert. But in the meantime, what we're dealing with is this. A top-rated late-night staple, as the staple of late night is basically going away. Jimmy Kimmel has basically said it himself. Late night will not exist in 10 years. Said that about 2-3 years ago. It may not exist in 2-3 years from now. The Optics is canceling the show with the controversy of the public statements. Looks bad. Although the role of a public company is to make money for shareholders, so they don't necessarily care about looking bad. CBS will have to fill the 11:35 time slot or give it away back to the networks. That decision wasn't told yesterday. We'll see what happens going on. Now Colbert has been big about doing a lot of political stuff. So Adam Schiff, I guess, was on last night. Senator Warren was on a few days ago. And they do their best to pursue investigative inquiries on things like that. So that may be part of it as well. But of course, the staff and Colbert has to find their next turn, their next gigs, and keep on going forward. Stephen Colbert, a very funny guy, very insightful guy, very good at his job. But you have to see what's going to happen, because remember, they're not replacing Colbert with a new guy. They're getting rid of a late night slot altogether. Networks have to deal with this because it's the reality of television. There might be a big echo in tensions going back and forth in what people are saying, how speech is free, how entertainers and politicians and corporate people are discussing things, and what may or may not be so funny anymore, which is, I guess, where this ultimately lies. But it is the end of an era. It's the end of a long time slot, a long run. And you could say a good run, if you will, because the times, they are changing. Things are different, and the way we view things are different. Is shorts on TikTok going to get us through the rest of our lives with very little bits and pieces and not a lot of time to really go into detail, not a lot of time to go into story? Remember, I opened this story about talking about being a 3-year-old hanging out with 75-year-olds. That was a bit of piece that goes to the extension of the thought process that, old and new can mix, but when you get older, you start to see where the new is and have to understand where they're coming from. That's where things go for her. This may just be a thing about TV, or maybe a thing about how things are working in general. TV is changing. Entertainment is changing. Infotainment is changing. Information is changing. Me doing this thing here is a change to how I would have done it 10 years ago. Or in 10 years ago, someone would have hired me to sit in a newsroom and work on something even at a lowly level because there were reasons to put those out there. Now I'm doing it independently in my spare time, in my sweatsuit, before I get to work, because I believe there's a hole that needs to be done, hole that needs to be filled with some things like this. Colbert was a hole that was filled for entertainment. It was a hole that was filled slightly for some education, if you will, because he had some pretty enlightening people on there, and a hole that will disappear, or technically a hole that will appear, that must be filled with something. Maybe they already have an idea what something is. Maybe they have a year and a half or so to figure it out. We shall see. Godspeed to you, Stephen Colbert, and the cast and the crew and all the folks behind the scenes at The Late Show. Paramount, we hope you know what you're doing.